Hello and welcome to Scilence, a podcast that gives women in science, technology, engineering and maths, or STEM, an opportunity to share honestly and openly about what it's really like working in these typically male-dominated subjects. Each week, one woman shares her stories and experiences. She could be a public figure, the girl next door, or someone from a far-off land. The point is she's deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we're not distracted by the details of her achievements, her labels, or what she looks like. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, also a woman in STEM. I studied mechanical engineering and ended up as a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my television work, I've met some incredible women from a diverse range of STEM fields. And you know what? I've been more amazed about what I've learned from these women when the cameras have been turned off and they're just being themselves. These women have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us. And it's that off-air honesty that I'd love to share with you through Scilence. This week, my guest is in the field of user experience design and research. Hi.
Hi there, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on this show. I know before we actually got started, we had some discussion about anonymity. What's your view on anonymity? Were you
refreshed? Well, no. So I felt refreshed and also, quite surprised. Not pleasantly or unpleasantly, but just surprised because I've become aware, I suppose, of the importance of actually sharing and maybe, being less anonymous when talking about these subjects, such as women in STEM, etc., or in roles which tend to be sort of dominated by men. So I was surprised when I got your email about kind of protecting my identity. And on one hand, I thought it was lovely actually, and I can imagine that other women might find that very valuable. But for me, it sort of kind of made me think about the importance of stepping out, using your voice, and sharing. And I find actually by having a voice, it doesn't always lead being popular, but it does actually make an impact and sort of helps other people.
why do you think women need a voice in STEM?
So I think that there's stereotypes everywhere, and I think in STEM in particular, when women get to a certain level within a business or striving to get to a certain level of seniority, there is this sense of there's a stereotype, I guess, about women in STEM, which is that they're oversensitive and that they overcompensate because there is a disparity between what men and women are paid still, and also how they're treated. And as I mentioned, having a voice doesn't always make you popular. And I think being a woman and a female leader within business can leave one feeling at least very unpopular. I was once told by somebody that I was working for, and it was on my first day, that I should be prepared for an office full of men. And I quote, you're not one of these women that overcompensates and is oversensitive, are you? And that left me quite shocked. And so I think that in some ways it's really important for women to continue using their voice and to feel they have a voice in STEM. But I can also understand how valuable it would be for someone to work with someone like yourself who is willing to protect their identity because they are fearful or worried about not being able to be open for the fear of being unpopular. Maybe some find it harder to open up than others. I mean, the same applies to men, right? But your podcast is about women in STEM, and maybe women would feel that they can speak more openly if they don't have to worry about repercussions, when they go back to work or, that sort of thing. So I suppose it just depends on who you are.
I mean, it's such a complicated, deep and layered situation because I feel, that women in STEM have really had to overcome a lot of obstacles to get to where they are in STEM careers. Why is having a voice important for you?
I think it's more the essence of having your voice taken away. So I generally, within the user experience design community, I'm well known for being disruptive. I use that word instead of controversial intentionally. But generally going against the grain, not following the crowd, using thinking and then using my own voice to sort of put things out there that may not always be popular with other individuals that are considered to be thought leaders within the industry. I see myself as a individual in business who happens to be a woman and therefore may face some further obstacles than if I had been born, a man. So, am I angry? Not really. Am I frustrated? Yes. Can I definitely say that I've had battles and yes, absolutely, I've had battles, but can I definitely say those battles have been as a direct result of being born a female? Probably, because it's really hard unless somebody says to you, you're going to be treated differently because you're a woman. It's very difficult to, there's no empirical evidence, well, definitely not in my case.
Female or otherwise, give us a sort of a visual of your career environment.
So currently, it's exciting and challenging. I'm a problem fixer, and I like problems, clearly. It's motivational. I spend a lot of time trying to convince very senior people to at least try to understand the value that research and user experience design can bring to their business. So a lot of what I do is I work with startups that have a pot of money and want to be able to get the best out of that money in a short time they have, perhaps for future investment, and to research, design, and build a product or service that we can feel people really want. So applying a user-centered design approach. But one of my favourite roles, I would say, is working with the businesses who are still adhering to legacy systems and processes, which are old. They're not employee-centric. They're very user-centric, but not employee-centric. So they're hiring, fantastic talent, in the field of user experience design and research, but are finding it very difficult to retain them because they're not particularly employee-centric. And a big part of what I do is about, people and process and then products versus just looking at the products and making them better. Talk about businesses transforming from the inside out, and it is very male dominated. And I try to not nowadays focus too much on my gender because I feel that it doesn't really do me any good to go in and think that somebody of an opposite gender might be able to do a better job. I just feel that it doesn't put me in the right frame of mind. But as I said, there's been lots of battles that I'm convinced have had to do with my gender. But I suppose it's something that you look back on rather than feel in the moment, unless it's completely obvious.
Okay, so I'm getting the impression that the career you're in is male dominated, but as a woman, it doesn't serve you to focus on that.
Yeah, I would say so. User experience design and research, or better known as UX, there are aspects to that, such as research, and there's a lot of women in research in the way that there's a lot of women in marketing, for example. And in some ways, one could argue that, there's not enough men in UX that are interested in or do research. And that's another podcast altogether. But yes, you're right. It doesn't serve me any good to go in and to think about it on a day in, day out basis.
Is that something you've learned over the course of your career, or have you always been that way? Of kind of just remaining gender neutral in your perspectives?
In some ways, my experiences probably have conditioned me into feeling like that because I've worked, for I've worked for a business who would very much tell me that if I was to be perceived as sensitive or whiny, I seem to remember, then that would directly impact, you know, what my bonus would be that quarter. So when I think about your question in more detail, more thoughtfully, there is the potential that I have been conditioned into just switching off and becoming detached from that side of things because I've not seen it as serving me any purpose.
Switching off that side of you, is that kind of denying a very valid part of your personality?
I'm used to being a bit of a chameleon in general because that's how I do my job, and I think that a good researcher is both inquisitive and also has amazing listening skills. And listening means listening means doesn't mean talking or kind of it just means adapting, I suppose. But it's in my in my general personality to be um, relatively uh, extroverted and outgoing and energetic and 100 words a minute, and in an environment perhaps that's more corporate than another. And then I think some of the best working environments are where you can be yourself, but most importantly where people accept you as you are, even if it doesn't quite fit. You're accepted for who you are and you're accepted on the work that you do.
Yeah, it's interesting because you may be touching on a massive raw nerve there, which is, can women be accepted as their whole selves in STEM fields? Possibly not, actually. Because if we are sensitive and we are more emotional than men, we perhaps have to turn that side of ourselves down to be in STEM fields. I mean, I wonder if that is generally the case. Has that been your experience then?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, there are some women who would say that they are less emotional and less sensitive than men. It's just that society has conditioned men to not be sensitive and not show emotion. So, that's a difficult question even in itself to answer. When you haven't asked that question, but are women more emotional and are women more sensitive, or is it simply that men are not able to be sensitive enough and men aren't able to show emotion, or they're not emotional enough?
Well, I think it's such a complex kind of issue because perhaps women are more emotional. Perhaps it's completely wrong to be categorizing men and women as being emotional or not emotional. The question, I think, is, does STEM allow you to be emotional? But I think there are some industries that really welcome that and some that don't. But what's interesting is that your industry being user experience, I would have thought the whole concept of experience requires empathy.
Businesses who want to transform and become more user centric need to design for emotion, and they spend thousands of pounds, a week because UX people who know what they're doing are expensive. We cost some money. These people sit in an interview and are told that they want to design to become human centered and design for the person, design for emotion. You know about sort of subconscious bias and designing for cognitive dissonance and all these things, designing for really behavior. Yet, is there room for them, the team, to actually show emotion? Is there room for the individual to show emotion in the workplace? And I would say that it really does depend on the type of organisation you work for, or the manager that you have. I think is more to the point. People find it very difficult to still talk about how they feel, and we spend how many hours at work? More time than we do with our spouses, with our children, with our family and our friends, doing the things that we volunteer to do, versus going to work and for some need to do. And yet we have to sometimes shut ourselves off. I wrote an article called, and I'm telling you this because I don't mind my identification being shared, as you know, called "What I Learned from Crying in the Toilets at Work." You know, and and um, and I'm not ashamed to say that I used to cry in the toilets at work, but I think it's sad that I had to be in the toilets.
And what were you crying over?
Well, I'll be very honest. I remember that. I mean, it was a number of years ago. It was sheer frustration of going on holiday, coming back, and finding it's silly now when I think about it, but finding that a team of people had redesigned this terrible experience on mobile, um, despite the fact that I had submitted research with empirical evidence of how this should be, laid out. And I'd come back and everything had been disregarded. And I just remember feeling completely overwhelmed and I think I was crying out of frustration.
Yeah.
Uh, I think interestingly, I didn't walk off, quietly to the toilets to cry. I think I was visibly upset and then had to go to the toilets to cry because I didn't want to sort of break down in front of everybody.
So what did you learn?
What I learned was that you try and get your voice heard, and you try and solve the problem, and you revisit it and revisit it until you get to a place where you realize that it's impacting, your happiness. And if you're not getting up and looking forward to going into work every day, or at least not dreading it, then it's probably time to find somewhere else that will allow you to make your voice heard. It's sad that nobody feels they can do that. And the reason is because at work, everybody's got a different agenda. Nobody at board level has committed to a vision, and if that they have a vision, then the rest of the business tend to not be aligned to that. So everybody's out for their own at work rather than all working towards a common good. That's what I've learned actually, and that there are a few businesses that do that.
So now you are able to show your emotions, show your sensitivities, and have a voice, it sounds like.
I think that I've just accepted who I am. I think that comes with age. Personally, for me, that has come with age. I'm also a parent, and that for me has been pivotal because I've just grown. When I say thicker skin, I don't necessarily mean I'm less sensitive, and I still care what people think, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. But I think that I am better prepared for not everyone being on my side. I just expect it now. In some ways, that's quite sad, but it's just the reality. I don't feel like I have to. I don't feel like it's really important to me that everybody likes me, or that everybody's kind and that people aren't mean. But now I accept myself, and I've realised that actually what I've learned really is that the more I have been myself and the more I have drawn upon my personal experiences, the better my work has become, the more work I have won, and the bigger impact I make on my clients because I draw from those experiences I have and try and bring them into their businesses. So it's left me vulnerable, but I don't feel afraid of that anymore.
Do you think all those lessons that you've learned are gender specific, or do you think everyone goes through this similar learning curve?
I don't think everyone goes through this learning curve because I think there are a lot of people who aren't like me and are afraid to be outspoken, are afraid to push and push and push and push until they make themselves miserable. I think that there are I'm thinking because there have been a lot of comments that I think have been related to my gender and my ethnicity as well at work and lots of other things. And as outspoken and bolshy as I am or come across, I'll be very honest with you, I've only escalated one of them and confronted one person about them. The comment that was made to me by someone senior about being a female and not being oversensitive, I mean, goodness, I could have gone to HR. It was my first day at work and I did nothing, and that doesn't fit with my persona or doesn't fit
Mm.
with who I am. And so I think, beneath all of this, I'm probably I probably think it's a battle that I'm not going to win. Um, why ruin the rest of my career at an organisation when a comment was made to me on a first day? That's how I saw it. And I think if somebody said that to me now, I would like to think that I would have done something about it.
What's driving you to fight through, to overcome these obstacles? Like,
It's quite cathartic for me. It's really therapeutic for me to be myself because, as I said, it's only been sort of the last several years that I've kind of accepted that it's okay to be a bit eccentric and a bit different. I don't want to sound like, you need to get your violins out. I had a very difficult childhood, very difficult, incredibly difficult adolescence. In some ways, my adolescence and school experiences were much worse than my childhood. And I had a really rough time up until I'd say, mid 20s. I'm facing 38 this year, and it's only been, I'd say, the last 10 to 15 years that things have been much smoother for me. So I am driven by, I'm a type A person. I don't want to waste time because so much time was wasted for me growing up. So I don't want to waste more time. So that drives me. I love being a mother. My children drive me. I've got, a boy and a girl. They're
oh,
twins, and they're 2 years
wow.
old. I think I'm a great role model for both of them. My father is 80 and still works full time. When he came to this country, he and his family, he was a baby, they were refugees. So I just feel really driven by, some of their stories, wanting to. I don't want to say I want to make them proud. I think they are proud of me. I think, do you know what? My dad said to me several years ago, that if you enjoy what you do, it's not work. And I remember that, and I remember thinking, yeah, I could just not play every day, but have fun by doing what I do. Well, the word work doesn't really have very positive connotations, so I'm driven by enjoying what I do every
Mm.
day and feeling like I'm making a difference. But also, I want to be a good role model to my daughter to show her. I was working throughout, my pregnancy, despite it was quite a tricky pregnancy. I was thinking about what I was going to do throughout my maternity, and I never really switched off. And also a role model to my son, of course. But being a working mum, I think is quite important.
I just feel that women have to take on everything. Not only do they have to push themselves so hard in careers as men do, but we also have this side to us that's nurturing and caring. And if we have children, we really are drawing on that side of us. And I just think, my heart goes out to women that really try to balance both.
I find my heart goes out to women that are forced to choose. My last client, I was with for 10 months, and that was completely remote. And they were, I remember, a bit skeptical. I'm laughing because I have a great relationship with the person that I was working very closely with, actually, and I showed him that you could work remotely, and that it can work. Yeah,
Mm,
women have to choose, don't they? It's really tough. And why
they
should why
do.
why should we have to choose? Why can't we, why can't we be trusted to work from anywhere and be there for our families? This is what I mean about businesses that are still stuck in the 1950s. I think that if you're forcing anybody, male or female, to choose between a work and life balance and things go wrong outside of work, either in a relationship or things fall apart, then you as an employer, indirectly have contributed towards that.
Do you think user experience as a career is suitable for women?
I would say so because there are so many startups, and generally I find startups tend to be a bit more flexible, um, because they don't have rigid rules or legacy systems in place at the moment. So, and everybody kind of has to get their hands dirty when you work for a startup. And if you are a woman who has skills in user experience design and research, and those skills are niche and are needed, then you should challenge that business to be flexible and say, well, if you want me, here are my terms. So I think a startup within UX design and research probably is most suitable for women. And digital, if you're contributing to a digital product or service, you could be based anywhere, couldn't you? As long as you have connection and you're online and you've got Wi-Fi connection where you are, it doesn't really matter. I know that when I don't always work remotely. Sometimes I go and see a client and then come back, but I'm mostly remote. And I think it's silly for businesses to discount this as an option. The reason is because I know that when I'm working with somebody, especially in the early days where you have to build that new relationship, I overcompensate because I don't want them to think I'm just kind of sitting on my sofa watching something and not delivering. They can't see me. So I will probably work harder, and I mean, this is not great for me, but I would give more hours than I suppose if I was forced to be in the office, because I'm just find that I'm more disciplined because I really want to earn my stripes and earn that trust and show them that it can work. And so I think, if you allow people that flexibility and allow them to have a work-life balance where they're not having to get stuck on, a commute, or if they're feeling really poorly, they're not going to come in and make everybody else sick. I mean, it just makes sense, doesn't it? They're going to be more productive if they're refreshed and they can start work at 9 but have had a shower at 8:30, or instead of 6:30 or 7, they get a bit of a lie. Just makes sense. But the businesses are frightened to let go, and so we're not quite there.
How would you describe user experience design and research? Because it seems to be quite a new career choice.
Yeah, I mean, people were doing it for a long time, but they weren't calling it UX. So for me, user experience of a product or service, say, let me ask you, what was the last thing that you purchased online?
I don't know why, but hair straighteners comes to mind.
Do you remember, does anything stand out to you about that experience?
Yeah, the promptness and the swiftness of the process. It was literally 3 clicks.
Okay, and so how did that make you feel?
Great. I felt like I'd got the best product for my needs. I'd seen what else was out there. I selected the right thing for me. I had reassurance of my choice because there were reviews. They already had my sort of payment details on hand, and the whole thing was very quick and hassle-free.
So it's interesting you say all these things, because it sounds to me that you have, obviously, in technology, a bit of experience of UX. Unless somebody has not a very good experience, if you have a seamless UX experience, you shouldn't really notice it. But it could be anything. It could be buying online. It could be, I don't know, walking into a shop and having a customer experience and seeing what that's like. Were you attended to? Were you able to find what you were looking for if it was a big shop? It could be ordering a ticket. It could be anything. So it's kind of like the touch points that a user or consumer has with a product or service. And one thing that I focus on is really ensuring that when you are designing or trying to improve the user experience of something, that it is informed by what the intended user wants and not necessarily what the business thinks the user wants. But for me, it encompasses the usability, the accessibility, the content, so the language and terminology used, the user interface, or the visual design, and also elements of persuasion, emotion, and trust. So what it is that helps us make decisions.
And how did you get into that?
I totally fell into it. But several years ago, I did a law degree, and during that law degree, I signed up for something. It was a usability study, and for me, it wasn't. I didn't know what a usability study was at the time, but it was basically this letter, this email that was sent out to a bunch of students. I was one of them that said, "Hey, do you want to make 70 quid for 45 or 60 minutes of your time?" And I thought, yeah, I'm a student, I'll go and do that. And I gave my feedback, and as you can tell, I like to talk, so they got a lot for their money. And I walked off with 70 quid, and I thought, goodness me, that was a lot of fun. And both my parents are psychotherapists, and so growing up, yeah, having an interest in behaviour. So I fell into it and I researched it. And after my law degree, I did a bit of work in fraud investigation for some clients in America, which involved a lot of research and profiling. And I used to put together these reports based on data and just kind of profiling and stuff and interviews. And I think I was asked to attend another one of these. And so I just kind of, I don't know, I think I researched a little bit more. And it was around that time I met my other half, who also works in UX, and so it all just kind of fell into place. So I fell into it, and I remember nobody was interested in hiring me. Nobody was interested in what I did because I didn't have an academic degree or anything. And I fought and fought and fought, and it was really hard for me to get here. But I just did it, I guess, by proving myself and delivering and learning. So I kind of fell into it, but I had to fight to get anywhere.
I'm wondering why you felt you had to fight in this particular field.
In UX, titles mean everything. And I can tell you in my industry, titles mean more than the person and, and merit. So I just fought and fought because I was, in complete awe of some really great, agencies. Some of which I've sat around kind of very senior meetings with some of the founders of those agencies, remembering how nobody gave me an opportunity. And so what I ended up doing was actually just working very hard and applying myself to the problem, which was, well, your website, your app is really crap. This is what you need to do differently, and doing some free work, which I would not, by the way, advocate for anybody. I don't think anyone should work for free. I had to do it though, to really get somewhere, and then say, well, now give me an opportunity, and then talk my way in there, prove something. Then you're only as good as your last project, and then I get another project, and then I had a job title, and then it was plain sailing. Not plain sailing, but it was just much easier than not anybody giving you an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, looking back through everything you've been through, what would you do differently? Like if you were to advise a young girl sort of starting on her own journey, what would you tell her?
Well, I would say that she should keep trying to get her voice heard. She should also pick her battles, and keep fighting the good fight. But if she's not getting anywhere after a good period of time, then she should just monitor her happiness and apply elsewhere, where she feels that she is actually making a difference. And to somebody that hasn't got their foot, in the door yet, link up with people like me on LinkedIn, or elsewhere. I'm actually in the process of building a community called UX Voices, which will be full of UX professionals. Like, if you think about LinkedIn, but just for UX. Yeah, like community platforms like that, to other groups. Follow thought leaders and ask questions.
Why did you feel like you needed to set something like this up?
Because there's no governance in this industry at all, and there are a lot of people making a lot of noise, including me, trying to get their voice heard. And I wrote a post asking the UX community, if I was to design a product or service for you, what problem could I fix? What would it look like? And everybody fed in and told me, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to house that under one roof, where everybody could network and communicate?
Yeah, because honestly, it's a field that I don't know much about, but it sounds really fascinating. But it doesn't sound like it's necessarily suffering from traditional sort of like gender inequality. It sounds like it's affected by just the fact that it's very new and doesn't have established rules.
There were a lot of men who happen to be web developers, app developers, and there's a movement to get women, to work, or trying to make it more inclusive to women to consider a career in development. And in fact, there's an actual group that's gone worldwide now called Ladies That UX, to especially address this problem.
Is there any kind of competitiveness, or do you tend to all stick together because you're a minority?
I've worked in a lot of environments where there are mostly men, if I'm honest, so it's hard for me to answer. Is there competitiveness? Well, I think a lot of so we do. Are you familiar with kind of working in lean teams and agile teams and scrums and that sort of thing? Would that make
No.
sense? No. So generally, when it comes to delivering projects within my industry, you tend to kind of work in groups. So you might have somebody who's a designer, a researcher, um, developer, a project manager who manages everybody, and content writer or something like that. And you do stereotypically, like I said, find that women tend to be researchers. Generally speaking, there tends to be more designers that are men than women, I would say. Definitely more men who are developers than women, I would also say. And also, I find there are a lot of female project managers, actually, now I think about it. But because people tend to be doing the same, like a different role, I guess there isn't that level of competitiveness between women. And I would say that it's so tricky for women in my industry to get to C-suite or board level that there's not even a chance to be competitive at all, because you just won't have a woman up against you if you have the courage to try and pursue your career and go up the ladder.
Mm.
Which is quite sad, really.
What does having it all mean to you?
Means that you're knackered, because that's how I feel. Oh, I don't know. Having it all means to me having a work-life balance, earning what you want to earn, doing what you want to do, being able to raise your children, work when you like, living where you want, and working when you want, I suppose, having it all means to me.
And do you think it is possible to have it all?
I think for me, I will never feel like I have it all, because I'm never completely satisfied. Once I've done something and I've achieved something, I look at the next thing to achieve.
So are there still things you want to do?
There are things that I would like to achieve within at work. I'd say I'm very happy with my home life, so I can definitely tick a box there. Very happy with my work-life balance and the friends that I've got, and that sort of thing. But there are definitely things that I want to achieve. There are bigger things as well. I like to campaign, um, for rights across the board. Really, gosh, there are lots of things I think that need to be fixed there. But certainly with a career, I'm definitely not done.
And how much has those past experiences you touched on shaped the course of your career?
I mean, completely, because I'd relied on myself. I can honestly tell you that nobody helped me at all. It was, this isn't to sound arrogant, honestly, but I didn't have any support or help from anybody. So it's completely shaped where I am now, who I am, what I'm doing now, and it gives me immense pleasure when I'm able to help somebody else.
Were there sort of pivotal moments that really sort of nudged your life in certain directions?
Yes. Really, the support of my parents, I would say, just the unconditional love from my parents and support that I had from them through really difficult times. I was probably born a sensitive child. I think I found it very challenging when my brother was born as well, because I didn't have my parents' full attention. And
Mm.
um, as a result of that, I, had some emotional deregulation, would probably be the best way of putting that. Throughout my childhood and growing up, and I found, social boundaries very difficult to identify. And I went to school, and because I had sort of a difficult start, I think I also grew up with a lot of stories and horrors from on my dad's side of the family. Unfortunately, when they came here from Eastern Europe, and were sponsored, I said, as refugees. And I don't think that was very helpful, if I'm honest. Growing up, I was very close to my grandma. She's an absolute hero. She got my grandfather out of a concentration camp, and they managed to come here. And yeah, and my grandma lived actually quite a long life, considering the stress she was under, and the stress that my dad and her other children were under when they were in Nazi Germany. And I grew up with a lot of horror stories. Gathered now I'm Jewish. I don't think really enough Jews talk about this generation, how tricky that has been, learning sort of those things. And if you grew up with stories, then you will know what I'm talking about. But that impacted me, I think, very significantly, and made it very hard for me to just contemplate, building relationships with people. So by the time I got to school, I was a bit different because of that, and I was severely bullied, and that then made it even harder for me to trust anybody. So it wasn't really until so I dropped out of school very young, and my mum has always said that one thing about me that stands out as what she's always known about me is that I'm a fighter. When I was born, the first thing I did was I snorted. It's like I kind of turned my nose up to the world and said, "Oh my God, you brought me here. Thanks for that." So she always said I snorted, and I've always kind of been determined to overcome all kinds of challenges that I faced. And I think then being bullied at school and not being able to know how to stand up for myself meant that by the time I got to 18, which is what they say is at the time that you would expect one to have had get their sort of life together, or at least the emotional element of who they are. Yeah, it didn't really happen for me. It was really tricky. And so I think when I think about pivotal moments in my life, there isn't one thing that kind of suddenly made everything okay. I think it was just kind of having to adapt and learn the I suppose social conventions, and of course like I don't completely fit in even today, and am I at peace with that? I am at more peace with it, I'd say, than I've ever been. It's still tricky, but I also can see the power of being different, and how that has impacted countless friends in my life, because I'm such an open person, and I'm so sort of like, I don't really have a filter. Because I'm just very raw, and and I bring that into the workplace. And I think the crying in the toilets bit, if I bring myself back to that, was because I had to find a way of being myself, but within rules and regulations, and within an environment that didn't quite that didn't allow me to fully be myself, because it wasn't seen as acceptable to be open.
And you had no roadmap of how to be. So it was kind of, it seems like it was a moment where you were like, I need to figure out how to navigate this.
Yeah, you're right. There was no roadmap, because I'd gone off the rails, when I was an adolescent. And I think adolescence is a very difficult time for most adolescents. It's very tricky. I didn't really have a roadmap at all, because I didn't really care about careers, and I fell into UX. I was just, I think the reason why UX is for me, and why I love it, is because it's just raw emotion, and I tend to find that I do that very well and very naturally, because I just have a lot of raw emotion still.
It's fascinating. What sort of age do you feel like you actually had a firm foothold within UX?
Or after university, in fact. That was when it took me a long time, but I would say that's when I thought, I'm going to really make something of myself here, because this is all about experience, and I've got lots of that. It's all about humanness. I've got lots of that. It's all about people. I love people. I would have said that several years ago, but I love people. It's about being inquisitive, and being intrigued and asking questions. I love asking questions about the power of why. That I knew it. I knew that was for me right at the beginning. So yeah, right as soon as I found out what the concept of UX was about and research in particular, that's when I knew it was for me.
And do you ever struggle? It sounds like you're very confident in what you do today, but do you ever struggle now with self-doubt? And if you do, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I do, of course. I just Googled the term imposter syndrome, which I think lots of women suffer with.
Absolutely, yeah. Who do you turn to, or what do you turn to overcome self-doubt?
My other half, who's my best friend and is a great person to talk to, is my biggest fan, and we lift each other up. I remind myself that there are, of course, going to be things that I don't know, but that I know enough to continue doing what I do. I've got a great network and a great, sort of. I feel like I've got people I feel who kind of follow me in this industry, and they give me confidence. So I thank them, now and forever for doing that because, of course, I have self doubt. There's people. I think this is why content is so important and terminology is so important when you think about UX because people words have an impact and make you feel. Emails have an impact, tone of voice has an impact, and terminology has an impact on how you might feel or how it's perceived, how the receiver feels when they read an email or you say something to them. UX is evolving and it's moving and it's the consumer is hungry. Like the big thing in UX now, for example, is voice. So how to design for voice. Once it was how to design for mobile experiences. So something on any device. Now and then it was big analytics. How to use data. These things come up and go in our industry, and I think that can be unsettling sometimes. But it's what I do is I just know that I know enough and that I am making a difference now, and I'm going to continue to make a difference, and I make the effort to keep up to speed with things that are relevant. And this hasn't happened to me for a long time, but I used to have to really practice mindfulness.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been so fascinating talking to you. First of all, I really resonate with kind of your childhood experiences. And I do really feel like your drive to try and make a difference and to try and help people because you didn't have that experience growing up. I've always had this kind of assumption that UX is very sort of like C++, web development, coding kind of aspect to it, but it seems to be so much more than that. And after listening to you, I don't know why more women are not in the industry.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. I just love the emotion, I guess, the emotional element of UX, and also just making things better. I've always just wanted to make things better. I mean, I don't know, like I used to be the collector of broken people, when I was growing up, friends, just want to make them better, and I used to, and even, now I kind of feel like it's tempting when people come into my life for the first time to try and make things better for them, their experience of life better, whatever they're going through, to try and fix them. I used to be try and be a fixer. And then you get to a point where you think, well, some people just can't be fixed if they don't want to fix themselves, or don't know how to fix themselves, or aren't open to understanding how to fix themselves. And I think the nice thing for me about UX is that you can fix things, and there's the human element of fixing things, but it's got some limit, so you don't sort of get dragged down in the drama yourself. There's no connotations, because I'm not presuming, but I just wonder also for yourself, someone who obviously sounds like she likes to think and knows how to think properly. You may have had people in your life potentially who, you try and help and try and fix or are there for, and then end up, I don't like the term dragging you down, but end up having more of a negative impact on you, and can't change or won't change or can't be fixed. And it's difficult, I think, when that happens. You just have to kind of draw a line and say, actually, that's enough. You have to be you have to have, I think, very clear boundaries as to who you will have in your life. I mean, definitely now I'm a mother, I would say, or a parent, absolutely. And so because it's in my nature to fix problems and to be in tune to the emotional aspects of things and how people are feeling, and working together on that, UX is a really fulfilling but safer way for me to be able to scratch that itch and to use it as an outlet, but to know that it's not going to have a negative connotation on me.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that there does seem to be space for women in this industry, and so it's encouraging for any women that are listening to this episode to know that there is a space for women in UX to be more sensitive and more emotional, because I think generally STEM industries are not welcoming of that feminine side.
I honestly, I would honestly struggle personally to hire somebody who isn't able to be sensitive or emotional, or to think about emotion within UX, because I would struggle with it, because it's human centered and we are emotional feeling beings, you know.
I'm fascinated by the fine balance of kind of masculine, feminine energy. If I don't know any other way of really describing it, but so for example, in my career, it was very masculine, energy centric. It was very nuts and bolts and gears and ratios and things like that. Whereas what's interesting is that bringing the typically more feminine qualities to this work it sounds like it's a plus. And having listened to your journey, it sounds like when you were like, not that you regret being more on the aggressive side, but it seems like with hindsight that when you were sort of in that fight, perhaps looking back, it didn't necessarily serve you.
Yeah, I just think that I thought fighting fire with fire would, get me where I needed to be, or what I wanted to do, and I think I should have picked my battles more carefully. And I think that if I was a man, I don't think I would necessarily be saying that, because I think people are much more accepting of aggressive men in business. Oh, he's aggressive because he's aggressive. He's a man. Oh, she's aggressive. Oh, yeah. Well, she's probably overcompensating, and somebody's probably got her back up or something.
I've hit upon an industry which really does straddle a lot of debate, for gender equality, and but it also feels like an industry that could be a fertile ground for allowing both men and women to have equality, because it seems to be an industry that really does appreciate very feminine tendencies of kind of sensitivity, like human behavioral awareness, things like that, experience generally. But then it also has an extremely technical side. So on the one hand, it's like, oh, here we go again. Here's a very male-dominated industry. But also there's a lot of hope that it could be an industry that will open more doors for women and actually appreciate what women can bring to the table.
I would agree, and I would say also, back in the day, nobody really thought marketing had a place at the table, at the C-suite table.
Yeah.
Now you have chief marketing officers, And I think that's really going to help UX, because a lot of CMOs happen to be women, and marketing is not the same as user experience design, but there are crossovers, and they work hand in hand quite often. And I think, by the very fact that there are a lot of female CMOs that have a place at the table, that can only be a good thing for women who, because there's this new role which is the Chief Experience Officer, a CXO, and there are lots of businesses that don't. That there are still lots of people that don't think that should be a C-suite thing, right? That it shouldn't be the CXO doesn't really exist or shouldn't exist. And I think it's where marketing was, several years ago. And so that's positive. And there are lots of CXOs, and I think that there are a lot of them that are still men, because they've moved from design. But that gives me some hope that many of them may become women in the future.
It feels like I've opened Pandora's box, and I kind of want to find out more about what it's like. But for now, I'm hopeful for women in your industry, because I think there's a place for them to grow and be appreciated, which is not always the case in STEM careers. So thank you so much.
Well, no, but thank you. And I was going to say, you're great at asking questions and opening Pandora's box, because I don't often talk very much about my early years experience, because I keep them in a box.
Yeah, I mean, definitely what I am able to provide is a link between anyone interested in getting in contact with you. I would be really happy to do that, especially hearing about your new platform that gives others a voice. And so, anyone that wants to continue the conversation with you directly can always reach out to me, and I'll put you guys in touch, because I do salute you for supporting women who maybe don't have the courage that you've shown to speak their truth. It does take a huge amount of bravery to speak out, and you're doing that, and you're providing a platform for others to follow suit. So if I can help in any way, I would be very happy to do that.
Thank you so much. It's really, really kind of you to say.
Wow, that was an incredible conversation. I feel like we only scratched the surface of the kinds of issues that a woman in STEM in an industry like user experience design can experience. I mean, I feel like it's an industry I don't really know, but yet I feel like it's an industry that could really be very welcoming and open for women who have technical knowledge and want to combine that with their sensitivities and awareness of human behavior. There's been a lot to digest, and I feel like any listeners who have resonated with what has been said today, who want to reach out to my guest and find out more, please do get in contact with me through my website, and I will certainly put you in touch. And also, please do subscribe to Scilence for more episodes along a similar vein. Thanks for listening. Catch you next week on Scilence.